Morning everyone, Siobhan Martin from the Digital Office here. Today we're joined by Richard Parkinson, Director at Farrpoint, and Thomas Buchendorfer, a Digital Architect from NHS 24. They will take you through this morning's presentation, which will last around 40 minutes, and then afterwards we'll have a Q&A session. We do encourage you to type questions throughout the webinar into the chat box, and they will be answered and picked up during the Q&A session afterwards. You can also raise your hand during the Q&A and ask questions via your microphone once I unmute you. If you have any technical problems throughout the webinar, please let us know by typing in the chat box and we'll do everything we can to resolve this. And now I'm going to pass over to Richard to take you through the first few slides.
Right, morning everyone. Hopefully you can see my screen. As Siobhan just said, I'm Richard Parkinson. I'm going to take you through the first 5 questions today, and then I'm going to hand over to Thomas to take you through the second 5. But just before we get into the questions, I think it's worth just spending a couple of minutes giving you a bit of context and a bit of an update on where we are with the Analogue to Digital Telecare program at the moment. You'll be aware that we've been working with a number of providers as part of our Wave 1 and Wave 2 of the Analogue to Digital upgrade. And as a reminder, that's Edinburgh, Perth and Kinross, East Lothian councils and Build Housing. We've been helping them through the process of planning and implementing digital telecare for their partnerships. I think it's fair to say that we're running a little bit later than we were expecting. We are expecting those organisations to go live with digital over the summer, but we are running some months later than we planned. The reasons for that is that we've, as part of the planning and process of implementing digital telecare, we've uncovered a number of complexities, issues, challenges, questions, whatever you want to call them, associated with digital. But that is exactly what Wave 1 and Wave 2 was intended to do. It was intended to find these kind of problems, to find solutions for the problems, and then to share the learning that we get from these partnerships with the wider telecare community in order that they can learn from that experience. And that's the process that we're really trying to kick off today, is taking some of that learning and feeding them into the 10 questions that we're going to run through today. It's also worth mentioning something else that the Wave 1 and 2 partnerships are doing, which is slightly off to one side, but equally as important, and that's collecting data on the analog solutions that they have. So this is all pre-digital. This is looking at the analog solutions they have and collecting a lot of data around how those solutions are performing. The reason for doing that is that provides us with a benchmark against which we can measure the success of digital. So those partnerships are collecting information at the moment about, number of failed calls, how long it takes to do a Telecare install on Analogue, how much time call takers spend doing administrative and kind of reconfiguration type work, in order that we've then got something that we can measure digital against. Because you hear people say things like, well, Analogue is 100% reliable, it never fails, etc., etc. And we know that's not true, but what we don't know is what the exact kind of figures are for the reliability of these systems. So as I say, if we can get that figure, it provides a benchmark that we can measure digital against. So today's questions, as I say, are really based around some of the learning that we've got from Wave 1 and Wave 2 to date, and it's really to allow other partnerships to give them some assistance when they're starting the process of planning digital and making sure that they're going into that process with their eyes open. They know what some of the issues could potentially be, some of the complexities, and they can plan for them early. It's about helping partnerships become informed customers. It's not about supplier bashing. It may seem like some of these questions are quite difficult questions to raise with suppliers. It really isn't about putting them on the spot. It is about making sure that both the supplier and yourselves are aware of some of the issues and have planned for them from early point in the process of planning for digital. The questions that we have today, we're just going to provide a high-level overview. We're not going to go into any great depth about any of the questions or issues that are raised. What we're planning on doing is having some more webinars on the back of this one, and we're going to ask for feedback at the end of today from the audience to try and understand what the issues are of particular interest, and then what we'll do is that we'll organize a later webinar around those topics in order that we can have a deeper look at some of those issues. And finally, just before we get into the questions, a few caveats. Firstly, and this one isn't on the slide, but it's important to stress that what we're trying to do here today is help organizations plan for digital. It can sometimes appear a little bit negative because, you know, it's a risk that it sounds like we're giving you a long list of things to worry about that maybe you hadn't thought about or your suppliers hadn't thought about. It is genuinely meant to be a positive process. A lot of in fact, all of the questions that we're raising today have come up in wave 1 and wave 2, and that means that we do have best practice. We have some answers that we can provide to partnerships to help them work through some of these issues. So it's not us trying to dump a whole heap of issues on you and good luck, guys. It really is that you know, this is the start of a process, and as I say, we'd be interested in knowing which topics it is that you want to look at in more detail in order that we can start sharing some of the learning around these and hopefully give you a bit of a steer about how best to address them. Couple of other caveats. The questions that we have today are relevant to all suppliers. We're not picking on any particular supplier above any others. They're relevant to all suppliers, and also the questions are relevant to all deployment models that partnerships may be using. So that's on-premise, dispersed, grouped, managed solution, outsourced, whatever. All of these questions are relevant across the board. There are a couple of the slides that we've got that have examples in them that are based on dispersed solutions, but that's just because we couldn't fit all the diagrams on one slide. So where you see a particular model, that should be read across as being applicable to everybody else. So getting into the questions then. First question, and we've deliberately started with a simple one. Can I buy it? It does seem like an obvious question, but it is worth asking. What we've seen from the work that we've been doing on wave 1 and wave 2 is that the digital telecare market is still relatively immature. There's a number of the suppliers that are still developing their offering, and in some cases organizations are marketing devices that are still in development, so you can't actually buy them yet. So before you're placing an order, you need to check, has the equipment completed development and testing, and can you buy it? And can you buy it within the timescales you need and in the quantities you need? So a relatively easy one to start off with. Question 2, does it work? Again, may seem obvious, but certainly one worth asking. And this isn't about the devices, standalone devices, do they work? This is more around looking at digital telecare as a wider solution. There's a number of combinations that you can have of alarm boxes in your solution, and you may have 3 or 4 different alarm suppliers in your solution, and you may have, you know, another organization again providing your alarm receiving center, ARC software. As I said before, this is still a relatively immature market, and what that means is we've seen that there's not a huge amount of work that's been completed to date to check for the suppliers to check compatibility between different devices. So for example, does an alarm box from supplier A work with the alarm receiving center software from supplier B? A lot of that work still has to be completed, and obviously there's new devices, digital devices coming on the market, and they'll need to be tested as they come along as well. Adding to the problem is around some of the standards that are available for digital telecare at the moment. For dispersed alarms, for open standards, not supplier proprietary standards, there really is just one option, and that's the Swedish SCAPE standard, which hopefully people have heard about. The SCAPE standard has some element of vagary in it, I guess, which means that there is a number of different ways of implementing the standard, slight variations on a theme for implementing the standard. And what this means is, it's not guaranteed that if you have an alarm box that uses the standard and an alarm receiving center that uses the standard, that they're necessarily going to talk to each other straight out the box. You can assume that it'll work straight out the box with Analogue, but in the digital land, it needs to be checked. The other issue is that in some cases, for the same reason, you may find that when you're using the SCAPE standard between suppliers, there may be some variations in terms of the number of features that are available. Some features may not work with particular combination of alarm receiving center and alarm equipment. So before you place any orders, you need to check with the suppliers whether your mix of all the alarm boxes and the alarm receiving center software that you're using, has it been shown to work together? Has somebody else done it? Has it been tested? And are all the features you need going to be available in the mix of equipment that you're going to use in your solution? Question 3, what do I need to do to make this work? Historically, with analog telecare solutions, the solution has tended to be standalone. Analog telecare systems have tended to operate in a lot of cases in kind of their own bubble, in that they don't have a huge amount of connectivity into the wider corporate IT systems. That is very likely to change when you start planning to implement digital telecare. So what you're going to see is that your digital telecare system needs to integrate a lot more closely with elements of the corporate IT system. So this could be things like having to provide the internet connection that the signals travel over. You could have to provide the phone lines. You have phone lines at the moment, but these could be digital phone lines, also known as SIP phone lines. You may have to provide or configure firewalls, provide and configure servers, etc., etc. So without getting into kind of huge technical detail about what those elements of the IT are, I think the important thing to note is just that there's quite a number of things that your telecare supplier may need or assume that you're providing. So you need to be clear on that before you place an order. What exactly is it that the telecare supplier is assuming that you will do and will provide? And also that you need to check that you can actually provide what they're asking, because we have seen examples where what is being asked for cannot actually be provided by the organization for reasons like contravening corporate IT policy, IT security policies, etc., etc. The other thing to be clear on is that there needs to be a single organization or person that is responsible for making sure the solution works. You've potentially got quite a mix of suppliers for the alarm box, the alarm receiving center, your internal IT, potentially third-party IT suppliers. A lot of people, a lot of scope for finger pointing if the solution doesn't work. So what you need is a single organization that's responsible for getting that working end to end. That's often called the integrator, who the integrator is. You need to be clear on who that is with your suppliers, because if you're not, it will be you by default. Final thing, it's a recommendation, a strong recommendation, that you get your corporate IT team involved very early in the planning of digital upgrade, digital telecare upgrade. As you gather from this slide, there is potentially quite a bit of IT work involved in implementing these, so it's good to get those teams involved early. Question 4. What do others need to do to make this work? This is really a variation on the previous question. And again, it's going back to the point that there is likely to be a number of organizations involved in making your in pulling together your end-to-end digital telecare solution. You maybe have a number of alarm box suppliers, ARC suppliers, etc., etc. Whereas in the analog world, you could go out, you could buy an alarm box from a new supplier, as long as it was using the right BS standard. You could be fairly confident that you could just switch that on and it will work with the ARC. Again, in the digital land, that's not necessarily the case. And what you may find is that when you add to, reconfigure, change one part of the solution, that has a knock-on effect on another part of the solution. So for example, if you start buying an alarm box from a new supplier, you may find that your alarm receiving center supplier has to do some work to make the solution operate with that new alarm box. So you need to be sure that you understand what the impact is on any changes to one part of the system on the rest of the system before you buy anything, and obviously that you're aware of what the cost and effort is from each of the suppliers in making those changes happen, and in order that you can go in with a full picture of what the potential impact of that change is. Question 5, is it secure? This is as technical as we're going to get in this presentation today, and I apologize. I know there's a few acronyms in here. I've tried to minimize them, but some were unavoidable. We've put this diagram in just to give an overview of what a typical digital telecare solution looks like. Obviously simplified, but what it looks like. All of the suppliers have a slightly different model, but most, if not all, have all of the building blocks that you can see on this diagram here. And what we have in this example is on the left a digital alarm box, looking a lot like a router there, a digital alarm box that is connecting via GSM, so it has a SIM card in it. It's connecting via GSM. And it's signaling digitally across to the alarm receiving center, and it's receiving voice back via analog dial-up via the PSTN, which is the public switch telephone network, the BT network. Just calls are coming in via that route. The important thing to note in this is that there are elements of the system, so the device management platform, for example, and the alarm receiving center itself, that are connected to the internet, and that the solution is sending traffic across on the internet. Sorry, I was getting a bit of feedback there. The protocols that digital telecare use are similar to those used in analog telecare, in that they anonymize user information to some extent. So what's being carried over the internet is over to the alarm receiving center is user 123 has alarm code 456. But the key thing from a security point of view to note with the digital telecare is that you do have devices connected to the internet, and there is data being carried across the internet, and that in itself raises a number of security issues, considerations that didn't exist in analog telecare deployments. In addition to the risk that's associated with carrying data over the internet, there's an additional element of risk in that it is known that some of the current digital telecare standards aren't in themselves secure. So the Swedish SCAPE standard has a known security issue. That security issue will be addressed when the new European standard comes out, the Analogue standard, which is due imminently. But current digital telecare equipment is using SCAPE, and as I say, that's got known security issues. None of these security risks are insurmountable. They just need to be known and to be managed. And responsibility for managing them will be split between the partnership and with your suppliers, and responsibility for where that risk sits is going to depend on where in the system the risk is and who's responsible for that. So before placing any orders with telecare providers, you need to be clear on any work that the supplier has done to identify and address security risks associated with their products, and also ask them what independent evidence they can provide to show that testing has been completed. And what that information will allow you to do is to complete a data privacy impact assessment, which will pull together all of the risks associated with digital telecare and allow them to be assessed and managed. So asking those questions as your suppliers will enable you to complete that document. And again, I know this is a complex area and one that hasn't been too much of a consideration under digital telecare, but as a program, we've done a lot of work around this and have some pretty solid advice around this as well. So that's the first 5 questions. So at this point, I'm going to hand across to Thomas to do question 6 onwards. Siobhan?
Okay, so thank you, Richard. Thank you, Siobhan. Good morning, everybody. My name is Thomas Buchendorfer, and I'll be talking through the questions 6 to 10 and taking us to the question and answer segment. So question 6, is it future-proof? So when you go through your journey of moving to digital telecare, you'll be thinking of how you address your early requirements, probably around the like-for-like replacement. And you need to think about your longer-term requirements as well as you scale up your solution or as you want to introduce new services and new ways of working. Richard also mentioned earlier that what we see is that the market is still in a fairly early stage of development. And so one of the things that we see there is that the solutions that are offered to you may involve some hybrid elements. So there may be elements of analog, there may be elements of digital. There may also be technologies involved that eventually need to be replaced, and so generate follow-on work for you to be aware of. So we've got a few specific questions that sit behind the overall questions that you should be asking your supplier. A few things that we have come across through the work we've done so far. Richard mentioned that current equipment probably relies on the Swedish SCAPE standards, and that the new European Analogue standard is now in the final stages of getting ratified. So one of the questions is whether the solution supports that new standard when it's ready, without any hardware changes. So you know that the requirements for security around encryption can already be met with the hardware that you've bought, you know, and the adoption of a standard should really only be a firmware upgrade through the device management platform. You've also noticed in the diagram from Richard that a typical solution currently still carries voice over an analog telephone line. So for a full digital operation, you will need to move to really IP voice. and so there's a question whether the solution can support that eventually. You may also find that some older technologies are still involved, so it's worth checking whether that is the case and what the expected lifespan is. Things we have seen is that solutions may contain the need to use ISDN lines. Solutions may also have hardware that really was designed for the second generation mobile networks, which may not be around for that much longer. And more generally, as you scale up, is there additional equipment that you need to install, other additional licensing requirements that need to be taken into account. Question 7, will my existing peripherals work? So from the work we've done so far, we can see that peripherals are largely unaffected by the shift to digital. However, there can be cases where the digital alarms are not compatible with existing peripherals. So it may be that as you adopt a new digital alarm box, that you need to invest in a new set of peripherals. We've also been told that there could be cases where existing peripherals will work with your digital alarms, but the set of available features may change. It may be a reduced set of features. So that's something that would need to be tested. So the question to ask your supplier there is, can your peripherals that you have already invested in work with the digital solution? Question 8. What happens when I'm dual running analog and digital? So you are currently already familiar with running an analog solution. If it's purely analog, then it's fairly straightforward. Once you are on a purely digital operation, it should also be fairly straightforward. But as you do your transition in the partnerships, in the projects that we're currently doing with our partnerships, we see that typically there is a dual running involved. Sorry, I just got a message from Siobhan. I forgot to switch my slides. Okay, there we go. So we have seen in the project that we're currently doing that partnerships are typically dual running technologies once they're moving from analog to digital. And this can complicate the technical solutions. So there can be additional time, effort, and cost involved. And it can also involve introducing some of those transition technologies that we mentioned earlier, such as the use of ISDN lines. So before you place an order, it's worth checking that the arrangements for dual running are very clear and understood, and everybody knows where the elements are that eventually need to be reworked, and how the digital solution is affected by the need to support analog for a period of time as well. Okay. Question 9, can I justify the costs? Okay, so it's pretty safe to say that the cost of digital telecare equipment is higher than the analog equivalent. However, it also offers a range of benefits and efficiencies that are not available in analog. So, for example, you have the potential for an improved service and improved outcomes for service users, which would be generated by a much faster call setup. A call can be set up within a few seconds, and also potentially much better voice quality. There can also be benefits around improved technical management of your installation. You'll have better awareness of any faults through a feature called the heartbeat that's available on your digital installation. And you'll be able to do remote software updates, remote device management. And by moving from analog to digital, you're also creating a technical foundation really for innovation. So our recommendation here is to involve your supplier in this. Ask your supplier, can you help us to justify the cost differential? what benefits, efficiencies have your other customers seen that we can put into our business case? Can we quantify them? And what solutions are you working on that will help us to realize further benefits? We're also doing this kind of work within the program itself, which I mentioned earlier, that we are gathering data on the performance of the current analog installations to establish a baseline. But within the program, we also intend to collect this kind of data from our partners on the digital installation and make that equally available to you as background information that you can use to build a business case. Okay, question 10. Where is your information about the analog shift coming from? So at present, we do not have really very firm details from the telecoms providers about their plans for changing the background infrastructure and switching off analog services. There are a few pieces of information that we can share with you. BT is planning to finish their digital move by 2025. There is still limited detail on how that will be achieved. Similarly, we have heard from Virgin that they are planning to complete their move by the end of 2020. An initial market consultation is now starting with BT Openreach, which runs to the end of next month. We've also heard that some customers by BT and Virgin will have the opportunity to take up digital services as early as this year. So you may come across service users, who perhaps don't have an analog telephone line anymore, and to provide telecare for those users requires a different approach. So that is what we know currently, and we're working on getting further detail and making that available over time. When you speak to your suppliers and you hear other kinds of dates, other kinds of information, it would be worth clarifying this, and we'd also be interested in hearing about that. Okay, to wrap up then, digital telecare offers lots of benefits to service users and service providers. But as you can see from the questions, there are many new considerations that come into play with digital. And really what happens is that you're moving further into the world of IT, where things are happening that are quite familiar to people who look after IT systems, but are quite new to the telecare world. And you can argue that it's not just a simple sort of transition into IT that's happening, but also a transition into a much more modern world around the so-called Internet of Things. So we've outlined some of the key questions for you to address here today. I'd be very interested to hear from you where you would like us to expand further. Out of which of these questions are of particular interest to you, where you would like to see more webinars from ourselves. Are there any other questions that you have where you would like us to present some webinars? So as Richard says, we are planning to continue this series. We will also be producing documentation that comes out of the learning that from our Wave 1 and Wave 2 projects and publish that as well. And yes, so please post your questions in chat. We'll address them here on the call. And apart from that, we also plan to send out a survey to you. So if you have any views, any other views, any other questions, you can feedback through there. And that is it. Thank you very much. So I think we can open it now to questions.
Thanks very much, Thomas and Richard. I hope everyone found that very informative. We'll now move on to the question and answer session, as Thomas has just said. We've already had a few questions sent in to us, which we'll start off with. However, again, please feel free to raise your hand or type into the chat box. So the first question Richard and Thomas, you're both on, so you can choose between yourselves who answers. So the first question is, should all Telecare partnerships organisations start collating baseline pre-digital data as a matter of course? If so, could we share the template or date sources that Wave 1 and 2 have been using?
Okay. We would be very grateful for any additional information that partnerships can provide. Obviously, the more partnerships we've got, the more accurate the picture that we have. We do have a template that we're using with the Wave 1 partnerships. So this is an Excel spreadsheet that's just collecting all of the information that we're looking for. So yes, if there's other partnerships that are happy to participate in that, then we'd love to hear from them.
Fab. So the second question we have is, how is analog data being gathered, i.e. field calls? What is the current state or position of the feedback received?
Right. We are slightly limited in terms of the information that can be collected on failed calls. So what we can get is information from the alarm receiving centres, the current analog alarm receiving centres, around failed handshakes and things like that. But we are aware that there probably are a number of failed calls that never make it as far as the alarm receiving centre. So when there's line faults, or when the call doesn't get through for whatever reason, because the user's on another device, etc. So we know that the data that we're collecting isn't 100% perfect, but it's going to be better than what we have today. So yes, we're aware that there's some limitations. So I think to answer the question is that we're running reports on the alarm receiving center software to give us the stats that are around the analog solution.
Another one for you again, Richard, I think. For question 2, would you recommend asking for a demo simulation of the equipment working in perhaps a test bed environment?
I'm trying to remember what question 2 was. Does it work? If a supplier is willing to do that, then yes. I mean, I guess the slight complication is that what we're talking about here is not about getting. And I'm going to name a supplier, and I'm not picking on this supplier, but say we get a Doro box and say, show me it working. It's less about that. It's more about, well, if I get a Doro box and I've got an alarm receiving center that's provided with Jontech, do those two talk together? So you need to get the two suppliers, if you were looking to do a test bed, to cooperate in order to show that working end to end, and there's potentially quite a large number of suppliers that could need to be involved in that. But absolutely, if you can get it, then fine. I think it's certainly something that's worth doing, because you don't want to be your live users being the test bed for this stuff. That's just not going to be acceptable from a risk point of view. So you either want some firm evidence that it's working somewhere else, or if they can't do it, that they show you how to work, that it's working on your premises.
Another thought I could add to that is that perhaps you can find a way to work with other local authorities and basically collaborate between yourselves. If there is already a digital alarm receiving center, you may be able to set up a little test in that way.
Again, it's early days with a lot of this equipment, and Scotland genuinely is ahead of the curve with this as far as the UK is concerned. So there isn't a huge amount of examples anywhere else where suppliers have demonstrated this stuff working. So as Thomas says, as soon as some of this starts to be deployed from within Scotland, I think that's going to be the evidence that people need that this stuff does work, and the boxes talk to each other as they should.
Thanks very much. Forgive me if I'm pronouncing this wrong. So should we wait for Senelec, or is it okay to go ahead with Scape?
Okay.
Shall
Do you want that one, Thomas?
Yes. I think I would say you can proceed with Scape, but it is important for you then to understand how security is provided when that standard is in play. And it is possible, but it requires having a look at the technical solutions. So you need to work, I think, with your IT department there and your supplier to understand that, to talk through it, how security is wrapped around, the use of Scape. So that's what I would say. You can do it. Once the Senelec standard is introduced, things will get easier in that regard. A lot of security work still has to be done, but I wouldn't say you need to wait. There are ways, there are ways in which you can adopt digital, whilst using the Scape standard.
Thank you. Next question. In a situation where the citizen has no GSM coverage at their home, will there be a Senelec box made available that allows the data traffic to transmit over their fibre to home instead of over GSM?
Okay. The answer is don't know specifically for Senelec, because there's no devices available today that support that standard, or certainly none that we've seen. I can tell you what happens under the Scape standard, and that is that there's often options to buy devices that support either GSM or plugged into some kind of fixed broadband, and it doesn't necessarily need to be fibre to the home. It could be any form of broadband that's available. So there's options there today, and presumably that there'll be similar options under the Senelec standard. The only thing we would highlight with that is GSM clearly wouldn't be an option for those users, but GSM is our recommended way of connecting digital telecare, just because it's more reliable. It's more reliable, and it's easier to actually deploy from an operational standard. But having said that, yes, there's large swathes of Scotland, especially outside the central belt, where that just isn't an option today, and you'll have to look at another standard. But you would need to look at things like what that actually means for the availability of the Telecare service when the power goes down, and how you're actually going to deliver that technically when potentially it's a service that the broadband service is not necessarily within your control. Things like, will Telecare continue to operate if your user's grandson is upstairs streaming Netflix in 4K, etc., etc. There's considerations around that would need to be looked at, but that's more from an operational standpoint than anything technical.
Thanks, Richard. We had some technical difficulties there, so I've had to swap computer just in case the screens have went funny. The next question is, will you be recommending suppliers after tests are completed?
No.
I think the program is there to provide really assistance to the local authorities as customers of those suppliers. So we talk a lot about helping local authorities to become intelligent customers. It is very much their decision then as to which supplier they want to go with. We'll just provide information about the learnings that we had through the program, through wave 1, wave 2, and subsequent projects.
Great. You might have covered this slightly already. However, there was some good points around security of digital telecare. Should every partnership and organisation procure some independent pen testing, specifically pre-implementation of digital telecare, and what are the indicative costs that are typically involved?
I think the likelihood is that there will be a need for some form of penetration testing for most organizations when they deploy digital telecare, and that is because they are connecting their solutions to the internet, albeit via firewalls and whatever else. In terms of how much that costs, I think we'd struggle to give a figure because it's going to vary from organization to organization, and it's going to be dependent on how complex their IT setup is. But yes, I think the likelihood is that there will be a need for some kind of testing. But again, just going back to the point that we were making earlier about the interoperability of different alarm boxes with the alarm receiving centers, and the fact that there's not a huge amount of evidence at the moment that these devices work together. I think the same is going to start to happen from a security perspective, where we know as soon as the first people do some penetration tests, then they're going to have some information on where potential security vulnerabilities are with supplier A, supplier B, and it's whether that information can be shared to some extent in order to cut down the scope of the testing that other organizations need to do. But long-winded way of saying, I think yes, there will be a need for some form of testing in most deployments, I would imagine. But the scope of that, I think, is still to be kind of worked out.
Great. Is the Telecare equipment being tested in Wave 1 using a broadband connection or mobile connections, or a combination of both?
It's it's a combination of both. We just need to differentiate here between the so-called dispersed model, which Richard showed you in the slides, and the group housing model. So what we see in the dispersed model is that the installations use GSM, and then we have a case where we are working with where BIOD is connecting a group housing schemes to the alarm receiving center, which uses something, basically a direct connection, virtual private network connection between the housing scheme or wired networks to the alarm receiving center. So it's so that in a sense is broadband, but it's business broadband, not a consumer broadband installation.
And just adding to Thomas's point there, what we have got within the choice of Wave 1 and Wave 2, it was deliberately done so that we made sure that we had some rural areas represented in Wave 1 and Wave 2. So obviously we've got Perth and Kinross and some areas of East Lothian as well, where there are issues with mobile coverage. And what we're anticipating is for those areas that we will be able to trial a small number of users using the model we were just talking about on an earlier question there, where we connect to some form of fixed broadband solution for those users. As I say, it's not something that we would recommend doing by default, but for some of these areas, there's no choice, and certainly we're keen to trial that as part of the connectivity work stream that we have within the Wave 1 program.
Thank you. A couple of questions left. You mentioned known risks to be included in DPIA. Are you able to publish these known risks to support partnerships with completing their DPIA?
Yes. What we have. I'm slightly hesitant because it's not actually my PIA, and it's one of the Wave 1 partners that we're working with that's developed what has turned into some form of de facto template. So there is a document that a lot of people are using, and we are also working to add to that document to better describe the technical risks and to better understand the technical risks. So the idea is there is a document there today, but it's going to be developed over the next couple of months to add much more around the technical risks that exist as well. So I think the answer is potentially yes. There is something that we can share there, and there's also some best practice and guidelines around how to progress the whole security issue and DPIA, etc. as well, that's being produced at the moment. So we've got quite a lot of work gone into this because we know it's an area that's relatively new and unfamiliar to Telecare. So we've spent quite a bit of time on this area.
Great, thank you. In terms of the integrator suggested in question 3, in cases where the ARC and the Telecare supplier are in different organisations, who would you suggest takes the lead?
The ARC and the Telecare supplier are different. Okay. I would imagine it's going to need quite a lot of collaboration between the organisations there, and I'll say up front, I'm not going to answer this with a straight answer. I apologise, but it's going to depend on who the personalities are and the organisations that are involved in that mix. I assume this is talking about an organisation where somebody else is running their alarm receiving centre on their behalf. Who is the lead in that? I think it's going to depend on how the split of responsibility for doing things is defined for that particular organisation. It's doable. It's absolutely doable, but it's just a matter of making sure that that's nominated up front. So I know I haven't answered that question, and I in a straight way, and I apologise, but I think that's a difficult one without actually knowing specifics about who's involved in the mix with that.
Thanks, Richard. Just a note that we have a few minutes left, so if you have any final questions, then please do raise your hand or type them in. The final question we have here just now is, does the change to digital allow us to do anything new and interesting for our customers?
Yes. Go on, Thomas, you want to say that one? Or?
Yes, potentially. So I guess this links to my statement that once you have moved into the digital world, you're dealing with something that is more like an IT system, and with which offers you ways to use information, outside the closed system that you had previously, which allows you to be, move into other kind of media that it can support, not just voice. So you have a platform, a technical platform, really, to think about new services that you want to deliver. You also have a platform where you can start to think about how you integrate telecare and telehealth services. So we have an innovation workstream within the program where we are thinking about, what can we do in this area. So that's happening. The focus at the moment, and where we had a lot of questions in this webinar is about the like-for-like replacement, the short-term need. But yes, so you should have a mechanism there, to expand out.
Yeah, there's a lot of hard work involved in putting digital in, as we've outlined in this presentation. But that is putting in place a digital platform, the digital foundations, as Thomas is saying there, on which we can start to layer a lot more services. So there are advantages in moving Telecare across on a like-for-like basis, in terms of efficiencies and some benefits for users as well in terms of faster call, etc. But there's also an awful lot of future potential that comes into the mix with the shift across to digital as well. And again, there's a work stream within the analog to digital program that is specifically looking at innovation and what that next layer of services are. So, yes, let's get across to digital, but let's have these new and exciting services lined up, ready to go once we've done that move as well.
Great, thank you. At the moment, we don't have any other questions apart from will the slides be sent out to the attendees, and the answer to that is yes. After this webinar, we will send out a short survey, which we would appreciate if you could complete. And this will just sort of gauge your satisfaction for the webinar, and also just a few additional questions on where you are in your analog to digital telecare journey. So I don't think we could have timed that any better, because we're just about to hit 11. So a big thank you to both Richard and Thomas. If you have any other further questions, please do feel free to email them to info@digitaloffice.scot, and we can pass them on to Richard and Thomas to respond to you individually. But yeah, again, a big thanks to both the guys, and thanks for attending. And we'll just end the webinar here.